Welcome to Conversation with the Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, professor of geography at Grand Rapids Community College. And today, we're really fortunate to have Mark Revell, the manager for career programs and disciplinary research at the American Association of Geographers in Washington, D.C. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I really appreciate you coming. And as I ask everyone else who's on this show, I'm going to ask you, please give us an idea of your upbringing, perhaps reflect on what got you interested in geography, if there was an episode in your childhood, and then move on to where you studied geography in college and university. Would you care to share?
Of course. So I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. So as you can imagine, come from a naval family. Both of my grandparents on both sides of my family were in the Navy. Both my grandfathers, one of my grandmothers also worked in the Navy. So as a kid, I could remember my mom's father, coming home from some of the overseas trips he'd be on and just bringing coins back from the Middle East. I remember he brought me a coin from Turkey one time, and it was just fascinating. And just seeing these kind of coins from all over the world just kind of sparked my imagination and thinking about these different places. And then I remember when I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, maybe a little bit older, I got for Christmas one year, I got a map that had, it was a map of the United States, like a puzzle map, where each of the pieces was like was a state, and each one had different industries that were happening in that state. So think, Wisconsin had like dairy farming and textiles in North Carolina. So just looking at these and wondering why is there dairy farming in Wisconsin? Why are there textiles made in North Carolina? And, just wondering why there are different shapes of the states, even why are states different sizes? Why are there certain activities happening in one state and not another? So I think that just kind of sparked my interest. And it developed into obviously a lifelong interest. So then eventually I went on to undergraduate studies and this is a pretty common theme amongst people that get into geography. I was undeclared coming into school, and then I took a physical geography course, and I was hooked on it. I didn't even realize that you could major in geography, to be honest. But I had Right. But I had a wonderful professor who was just great and super charismatic. And I think several of us in the course ended up becoming geography majors.
Who was that?
That was really it after that. Oh, what was the guy's name? Grigory Ioffe. He was from Russia. He had immigrated from Russia around the when the Soviet Union was collapsing, and he was just a fantastic professor.
And so you were inspired by this professor really to consider physical geography, and then you took other geography courses?
Yeah, that was kind of physical geography. Geography was kind of the gateway, and then I took some GIS, took some human geography. I think I took like a human geography of China course, which really opened me up to the other side of geography, and eventually ended up becoming a geography major and got my degree. It took a couple years off after I got my degree to do a little bit of traveling and just figuring out what I wanted to do. And this was right around the time of the Great Recession. So I graduated my undergrad. I finished my undergrad in 2007. So it was not a great time to be entering the workforce. But I knew I wanted to go into graduate school anyway. So eventually I was looking at different programs and saw that George Washington University had a really, really strong human geography program. So I ended up going to GW and had some awesome professors there. Studied under Dr. Lisa Benton Short and Dr. Murray Price, David Rain, some other just really great geographers. at GW. So that's where I ended up getting my master's degree in 2010.
Would you care to comment on any particular anecdotes that that Lisa or Marie really demonstrated, that captivated you, perhaps, that weren't really things that other professors might have done or did?
Yeah. Well, I know one of the things that David Rain would take us around to field these many excursions around the District of Columbia, to neighborhoods that we probably otherwise I wouldn't have really known about, and just talking with us about the local history of these areas. And I remember him taking us down 16th Street in DC and just talking about how different the neighborhood was 10 years ago, even as it was still emerging. Some of these neighborhoods were still kind of emerging from some of the riots that happened in the 1960s, and so just learning about the different character of these neighborhoods and why certain things where they were was really great to me. And I think it's probably one of the ones I could probably think of a couple others, but yeah.
Well, anyway, so you're there at GW, and you're taking a number of geography courses, and you get the idea of writing a master's thesis on what?
So this kind of stemmed from a class that I was in with Lisa Bitten Short. Her focus is a lot on urban geography. So, and the kind of the privatization of public spaces. So right down the street from where I was living at the time when I was going to GW was this outdoor at the time, and you still see a lot of these, but they were very much very trendy at the time, were these outdoor shopping areas where it's a mixed use development where you have retail and there's anchored by a Barnes and Noble or something, but there's other shops around, and it's kind of these places kind of function as outdoor open space malls. So there's a word lifestyle center that kind of describes these outdoor malls.
There's always some kind of vegetation that characterizes these places, unlike a shopping mall that is multi-story, right?
Right. So I got this idea of, well, how does this space, which is functioning as a public space, but it's really a privately owned development, So how is this filling the role of a public space, and centering that within the larger context of the decline of public spaces in America and the decline of these indoor mega malls. And there's why are people now gravitating toward these public spaces, these outdoor open spaces that are more tied into the urban grid than some mall out in the suburbs that's surrounded by an ocean of parking lots? Does that represent some kind of public desire for these spaces? How are people consuming these spaces in a different way than they would at a traditional mall? So that ended up becoming my thesis, just looking at this lifestyle center in Arlington, and then choosing a couple of other case study lifestyle centers across the U.S. and looking at how they developed and how they function as public spaces, even though they're private.
Well, what I found interesting about this work that you completed is that you really indicated that there was no one model that everyone followed, but there were a number of similarities among them. For example, one might be open many hours, the others would prohibit people from entering at certain times of day, intended to ameliorate the threat of of vandalism, perhaps, and also homelessness would have been a problem in some cases, at least perceived by the shop owners and those that were managing the lifestyle centers themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think? Have you reflected upon this research since that time? And when you see a lifestyle center, do you think about how this fits in with what you examined several years ago?
I do, and I think in certain ways, like they do kind of fill this role that that has been kind of like missing from American society, which is like the need for like a central commons, where people can use the space in different ways and whatnot. And I've seen some really good examples of them. I mean, it's really all over the map. There are some that are basically just working like in the same way a traditional mall would be, because they're so cut off from the rest of the urban grid and so forth. But if developers, if you build these in the right way, where it's really tied into the urban fabric, where it's almost imperceptible that you're entering a place that was made and conceived by a developer, so it really kind of runs the gamut from really well from really good models to ones that are pretty subpar. And a lot of it was, why are we seeing all of these malls, these traditional malls, decline? To me, it's represents a desire to kind of move back to these shared spaces where we do have like more of a sense of community.
Well, it's very interesting, and it seems like these lifestyle centers are aesthetically pleasing, as opposed to, again, the multi-story malls, which might not be, and they also create this image of being of being a place where one can enjoy the outdoors, as opposed to being inside. And they provide pleasant environments, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. That's absolutely part of it.
But one of the issues is they can also be quite exclusive, right?
Yes. Exclusive, and there's issues when you look at surveillance, and technically you might not be able to do this same kind of you can't hold a protest in a privately owned public space that's really not public. There's all kind of restrictions on how the space would be used. So it's really giving the impression that it's a public space, but it's not truly a public space.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a topic that really needs to be addressed continually, I think. And geographers are just the craftsmen and women to do it. I guess now we have you in graduate school, completing a master's degree. You begin to serve an internship then with the AAG, right?
I did. Yeah.
And at the time, it was the Association of American Geographers, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were still the AAG, but the A's were reversed. Yeah, we were the association then. And I think until the first 3 or 4 years I worked there, and then we changed the name around 2013 or 2014. So yeah, I remember it was the summer after I'd completed my master's degree, and I was, putting in interviews, different organizations in DC, and then, I think it was Marie Price that I was on one of the GW email listservs where I got this email forward that AAG was looking to hire interns, and me coming out of graduate school, I was a non-traditional intern. Most of them are undergrads, but I needed a gig. It wasn't just that I needed a gig, but I knew Marie, and I knew a lot of the good things that the AAG was doing, because I'd actually been to my first AAG meeting was the Las Vegas 2009 meeting. So I was aware of the association and the work that it did. So I jumped on it and never really looked back. I started interning there over the summer, and then I was brought on full time that fall.
Mm-hmm. I know that while you were an intern, weren't you involved then with regard to the Visiting Geographical Scientist program, or was that much later?
That was a little bit later. That was a couple of years after that. Yeah. So when I was an intern, I was mostly working with Michael Solon. I don't know if you know Dr. Michael Solon at Texas State, who is still works a lot with the AAG. So we were working on a couple of programs together at the time. One of them was called EDGE, is the acronym, Enhancing Departments in Graduate Education, which is basically looking at trying to better align the skills and that geographers are getting, coming out of graduate school with workforce demands. So like, here are the competencies that someone trained in geography who's coming out with a master's degree has. How well do those kind of match with like what the workforce demands are? So as part of that project, I was involved with like interviewing professional geographers, so applied geographers that are out there working in the federal government or state and local government, private industry, and so forth, to get a sense of like what kind of skills they need from day-to-day job skills that they're using, and how their education in geography helped prepare them for that, and what kind of things they didn't get from their education in geography that they wish they'd had from their program. And the results were basically meant to inform geography programs about, or just trying to better align them with the kind of skills needs of the workforce.
Do you recall what some of the major benefits and or liabilities happened to be at that time, or were considered to be at that time by those that you interviewed or surveyed?
The benefits or liability. Yeah, I would say one of the big things that came out, one of my big takeaways, I guess, was the need to, or not necessarily need, but you are generally going to be much better prepared for the workforce, or for a non-academic, for an applied job in geography. Obviously, it depends on what you want to do, but it's very powerful to combine a geography with some kind of other skill. So like a geography degree combined with a business degree, or a geography combined with computer science, is a very, very powerful thing. And it's not that geography itself isn't sufficient. It's just that a lot of these employers are looking for well-rounded individuals that have a mix of these kind of skills and spatial skills combined with like business skills or coding skills and things like that. It's just a better, my takeaway is that someone with this combination is just much better prepared for the workforce.
Well, those are really important pieces of advice, I think, for this information to be delivered to prospective students in geography, those who wish to engage in the study and get non-academic positions, because those of us in academia have seen changing demands in the labor force, right? I mean, prospective employers have changed their viewpoints concerning what might be needed over the course of the last few decades. And this kind of research that the AAG has conducted is really, really kind of valuable. So I guess from there, when Neem Nguyen left AAG, that's when you took the VGSP, the Visiting Geographical Scientist program, right?
Yeah, I took it from Nim. Nim was the previous AAG staffer that coordinated the VGSP program. So I took that over from him, I want to say around 2013, 2014.
Mm-hmm. And would you care to comment on that program and its value?
Oh, that program has enormous value. So the Visiting Geographical Scholars Program has been around for a long time. I think Mike, you might even know more about it than I do, because I know you've probably participated in that program longer than anyone. But so every year it funds probably I'd say 3 or 4 visits a year from prominent geographers, so people that are well known in the discipline. So think folks like Dave Kaplan, our former AAG presidents or influential geographers. So this program sponsors visits from them to different universities or colleges around the United States that, some of these schools that they end up visiting are smaller programs where they, might just have a couple of majors or something like that, where they're trying to build up the program or something like that. But just talking about why geography is important and why it's relevant, especially to college administrators, so they understand its value. Mm-hmm. So I'd say we've probably sponsored hundreds of these visits over the years, and I know a lot of them have been really impactful.
Yeah, I know when we have a visiting geographical scientist come to Grand Rapids, it's really a main event. Debs Ghosh came here in March. She delivered a lecture at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum that was attended by more than 120 people, and wow. you had people from the healthcare community, major hospital networks attending, colleges and universities. You had corporate sponsors of the World Affairs Council come and see her, and then of course many students as well. And then she interacted with so many people. It really boosts the image of our discipline when people wonder, what's that got to do with geology or something like that, So I can vouch for the program. It's a very effective program for sure. Let's talk a little bit more about other things that you're doing in terms of your role at the AAG. But before we get into what you're doing specifically, I guess what I'd like to do is ask you to reflect upon what the AAG does and what academic geographers essentially don't know about it. Because the AAG is essentially our representative in the academy, Yeah. And here, as academic geographers, many of us don't really know what's going on. And I guess I might ask you, what would you like academic geographers to know about the AAG?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I guess before getting in, I mean, I can just give like an overview of kind of like, why I think the AAG is valuable and some of the things that are, from my perspective, the most important things that we do. So I think, when you join the AAG, you're joining not only a national community of geographers, you're joining a global community of geographers who are very likely to have similar interests to your interests. And as part of this community, obviously we're all stronger together, right? So, things like advocacy and, for, banding together to advocate for the importance of geography education and doing things like Mike, I know you as a member of the Healthy Departments Committee, and Dave Kaplan, trying to make the case for why geography is important. So we're, we all see that it's under threat in a lot of states. As budgets are cut, geography is, unfortunately, it's usually one of the first programs that's targeted. So I think being a member of our association helps put us in a position to fight back against that kind of thing. And also just the sense of camaraderie, being part of this community. Not only are you part of this global community, but you're also part of a regional community. With our regional meetings, you can connect with other geographers in your state or in your region through your regional meetings and kind of establish that kind of connection and do that kind of networking. Professional development is a huge part of it. Presenting it at the AAG conference, having feedback on your research from other people, other folks in the field is huge. Not only for academic geographers, but also for applied geographers. And that's always been kind of my role, is more as on the applied side and kind of raising awareness about what you can do with a degree in geography. That's, besides just going into academia. Not that that's obviously that's huge as well, but just showing that there are these career opportunities out there. And so what I've kind of tried to do over the years is bring folks in that are working in government, bring geographers and that don't have the job title of geographer, but they are geographers. They have degrees in geography. The work they're doing is geography. And having them talk on panels about how they use geography in their work and why it's important. Because we can't hammer this home enough of how relevant our field is right now. It's more relevant. Geography right now is more relevant than it's ever been. I mean, just look at your phone, look at how many apps have a geospatial component to them.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is tied to space now. But that, for whatever reason, we're still seeing the numbers of geography majors decline year over year. So my job is to say, look, there are all of these opportunities in our field that are meaningful career opportunities. And not only can you make a good living, but you can also make a difference in the world. So I think, becoming a part of the AAG, you do have this access to this community of geographers, of academic geographers, of professional geographers that can help you maybe understand where you want to go with your career and help you get there. So I don't know if that's rambling a little too much, but
no, I think those are very, very important comments, because you're providing insight with regard to what our organization happens to do to a large degree. And again, geographers should know that it's not just the annual meeting, or it's not just regional meetings, but it is really an ongoing effort that requires a lot of behind the scenes individuals like you to make things happen so that we can not only practice the craft of geography, but, as you mentioned, make a difference. And we should try to make a difference.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say a couple of the things that, just getting back to your point about, what would I want an academic geographer to know about what's happening at AAG? I'd just point to a couple of, just a few examples of some of the programs we have going now. Our Elevate the Discipline program, mm-hmm. where we're training these cohorts of geographers, providing media training so they can go out there and educate the public about how important geography is, why it's important, and what they're doing, why it's relevant to the global issues, global societal issues that we see out there right now. So training each, there's several cohorts coming through the program, but, just providing that kind of media training. I think you have to start somewhere. And I think just having more of these folks out there that can identify themselves as a geographer, is hugely important. And another thing I would mention is our request for partnerships, our request for research partnerships that we've just implemented this spring. So this is a program that's coordinated by my colleague Colleen Doney, who is our senior researcher here at the AAG. So basically, it's in a nutshell, we want to work with AAG members to help them develop their ideas to try to pursue funding sources, whether it's grant funding through the NSF or corporate sponsorships. If you have an idea that aligns with the goal of elevating geography, trying to get more folks interested, trying to build the pipeline into our field. The AAG is very interested to work with folks to figure out how we can do this together, how we can align our work, and how we can help achieve our mutual goals. So an example of that. So my role now is shifting more into to grant writing. So we just submitted a grant to the NSF with a group called Treble & Co. So they're a nonprofit organization that specializes in raising awareness of STEM fields to underrepresented minorities. So like high school juniors and seniors who have never had any exposure to GIS, that have come up in these communities that are disadvantaged. They haven't had the same access to things like public transit or a lot of them are coming up in like these food desert areas or just communities that are for whatever reason that are disadvantaged. So trying to get them interested in STEM through a geospatial lens. So holding these workshops where they're learning the basics of GIS and then applying that to issues that they're seeing within their own neighborhoods and their everyday lives. Why is this? Why are an example? There was a recent mapping justice program in Florida where some of the students looked at the uneven impacts of natural disasters. So when the recent hurricanes hit Florida a couple of years ago, one of the students did this research about why minority communities were hit harder than anywhere else, and so why is that? And the student that has formerly had no exposure to geography or GIS put together this fantastic project using GIS to talk about, examine these issues and these injustices that they were seeing. So we're working together with this group to in a couple of case study sites, geography programs throughout the U.S. to run these mapping justice programs to try to develop these into like a high school to undergraduate bridge programs to try to get more folks, not only more folks interested in geography, but more underrepresented folks into our field. Because as you know, geography is it's not as diverse as some other fields. It's not as diverse as as higher education as a whole. We're lagging behind there. So
in the social sciences, we have the fewest number of Latinos and African Americans combined than other disciplines in the social sciences.
Yes. And geography is very much in line with that.
That's embarrassing. We have failed to be more inclusive over the years, and this is an effort that we must engage in. And those
absolutely,
DEI initiatives are very important.
They are incredibly important, incredibly important, especially in light of you well know a lot of the challenges that have been popping up in a lot of these states. So, but we're forging ahead with these. One of the schools that we're working with had some reservations because their state is very anti-DEI. So what is going to happen with my program if I, or will I be able to get these funds in my state? Will I be able to implement this program in my state, which is very hostile toward this work? It's a very real thing that we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. But it's very difficult, that's for sure. We are in uncertain times in higher education. Now, you've discussed a number of issues that are challenges for us as geographers, one of which is to inform people, I suppose, that there is future in there is a future in majoring in geographical study in terms of employment prospects and in terms of contributing to humanity. But in some states, there are challenges with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. What do you suppose are, beyond that, other challenges that our discipline faces and the AAG in general?
Well, that's a really great question. I think our biggest existential challenge right now is the decline of the number of folks majoring in geography. It's and that's one of the big things that I've looked at. So the disciplinary research part of my job title is looking at the federal numbers. So the National Center for Education Statistics puts out numbers every year on how every academic discipline, the number of majors or the number of degree completions in that discipline. And geography peaked at around 5,000 degrees conferred in 2012. Since then, every year it's gone down, literally every year since 2012. And we're now at around 3,800 degrees awarded a year, which is the lowest we've been since like the early 90s, I want to say. So we're at a very low ebb right now in terms of like how many people are coming out into the world with geospatial geographic training. So fewer geographers means fewer geography. Eventually that's going to mean major challenges, and it already is for geography programs. Maybe not some of the bigger ones that have better resources, but we have seen closures for a lot of these smaller programs that are in states where education funding is being cut, and one of the first things they look at is the number of majors in your program. So that's a major challenge, and that's something that I think that's why our Healthy Departments Committee is so critical to the AAGA, because we're trying to look at ways to combat that. And I think the most powerful tool that we have is by showing that the robust job numbers for geospatial professionals. There's just so much opportunity out there for someone right now.
And the salaries are pretty good.
And the salaries are good. The average
maybe second to economists in the social sciences on average, really.
I think we are second or third or something like that. Yeah, maybe second.
And it's a close second, I think. Again, next to economists.
Right. You can make a great living with the degree.
And we're more interesting than economists are.
We are more interesting than the economists, for sure. So it's just a major challenge getting that point across, because there continues to be this public perception that geography isn't important, or there's no, it's fun to study maps and to know where places are, but there's no career in this, which couldn't be further from the truth.
No, there's certainly plenty of opportunities, that's for sure. And yes, it is a challenge, and it would be nice if we weren't threatened by departmental closures or by higher level administrators in universities and colleges that really don't know much about geography. And it's our task to really inform them and to, as you've indicated, elevate the discipline, give them really an accurate perspective of what it's all about.
Absolutely. That is our central challenge. I will say, not to be all doom and gloom, one of the positive things we've seen is the number of geography and GIS programs coming up at community colleges. And Mike, you well know this. We see a lot of these GIS is doing very well. You don't see as many like standalone GIS programs, but it's infused itself in so many other disciplines. So people are getting geography, whether or not they're realizing it or not. You see GIS in computer science. You even see some GIS in chemistry programs now. I mean, it's widespread, and these programs are growing pretty quickly at the 2-year college level. So to me, that if we can find ways to translate that into more folks majoring in geography and creating more sustainable programs and getting more geographers coming into the pipeline. I think that's the way that we do it, is we try to get, try to do everything we can to support two-year colleges. I think are incredibly important.
Well, the two-year colleges do enhance the opportunity for facilitating diversity in the discipline, and we do serve a very large proportion of our country's undergraduates. I believe it's close to 40% today.
Something like 40%.
Mm-hmm. Which is a big chunk to ignore, really. And I would think also that we should really consider the non-traditional students, or we call them today's students, who are older, because this is where I think our market in higher education happens to be, is with the older students. There's a lot that we can do as we seek to engage in study concerning how instruction can be delivered to working adults.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I see that pretty often. There are like geography, geospatial meetups here that I sometimes go to in DC. So one's called Geo DC, where it's just all, very few of these folks are academic geographers. A lot of them are just working for the federal agencies here in DC. They're GIS practitioners, but they identify as geographers. And, they're, so we do these like monthly meetups where a lot of the folks here came into it very late in life. They discovered geography in their 40s, or some of them even in their 50s, where they have always had an interest in maps or whatever, but just didn't realize that it was a viable like career path. And you see this a lot. And I think a two-year college is a great pathway for these kind of non-traditional folks that want to be able to get an education and go into this field. Absolutely.
Well, Mark, we have about a minute or two left to go, and I'm going to ask you to think about the work that you've done in the AAG, your university studies, and to consider what sort of advice you might give to a student, an undergraduate interested in pursuing geography, or a graduate student that's completing a geography degree. Do you have any words of advice you'd like to share?
Sure. I mean, so again, this would be like mostly just from my line of work, which is in kind of like developing the geospatial workforce. So I think don't be afraid don't shy away from marketing yourself as a geographer. There's no shame in that. When I was coming out of school, which is, 15 years ago, when I completed my graduate studies, it was almost like the opposite of that. It was like, well, how do you convince an employer that this, your degree is relevant, because this employer is not going to know anything about geography, what a geographer does. But now I think it's a little different. I think you need to lean into it and don't be afraid to identify as a geographer, but also think of the work that you're doing, whether it's as an undergrad or a grad student. Whether you got a capstone project or your dissertation or whatever it is. But from an employment perspective, just wherever you're looking, think about elements of what you learned in school, or your specific project, your capstone that connect to the organization's mission, and explain how that qualifies you and why having these geospatial skills can benefit their mission is what I would recommend.
Mark, thank you so much for providing that input. And thank you for spending this time with us today. Really appreciate you coming here.
Of course, Mike. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. And this now concludes this episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you.